Jeh Johnson, Secretary of Homeland Security. Thank you for being with me today.
Luiza, thanks for having me.
Great. So let's just jump in and talk about something that's been in the headlines in Canada a lot, and that is the no-fly lists. What is going on with these no-fly lists? We know that Canada and the U.S. are sharing more and more information about travelers crossing the border, but now we're in a situation where 6-year-olds are being pulled off of flights because they have a Muslim name that's confused with someone else. Can you give us assurances?
Well, in general, I have to say that the relationship between the United States and Canada, insofar as our joint security interest are concerned, has never been better. I have spent a lot of time working with both the Harper government and now the Trudeau government on things that we can do together for our shared security interest. A no-fly list is and has been for a long time an important tool to secure our borders. And obviously, when you have a no-fly list, there are going to be errors in names. There are going to be names that more than one person has. And so we have built a process for people to get off the no-fly list. Most of the time, when somebody's on a no-fly list, it's simply a matter of mistaken identity. And the process of resolving the mistake can work pretty quickly.
So can you give any assurances to Canadians that as this information sharing increases between the two countries, that there'll be more done to avoid these errors in identity?
Well, information sharing between the two countries always has to be done consistent with our laws, consistent with Canadian law and consistent with U.S. law, along with each country's privacy interest and the privacy interest of the citizens of each country. So, as I said, we've invested a lot of time and effort in the no-fly list and resolving errors in names and mistaken identities in the no-fly list. It's a work in progress. It's much better than it used to be, and most of the time it's a matter of mistaken identity which is resolved fairly quickly.
And the second question about no-fly lists is, what about those cases where it's not a mistaken identity, but it's someone who's on the list and they don't feel that they should be? Courts here in the U.S. have said that people have a constitutional right in the United States to contest the reason that they're on the list. Is that something that would also apply to Canadians or people from other countries, or only Americans?
There is in the United States a freedom to travel, a freedom to associate, and I'm sure that Canadians cherish those rights and opportunities equally. And so as we share information more and more for our respective security interest, I think it's incumbent upon both governments in both countries to be mindful of the privacy, civil liberties, and the values of citizens from both countries. And so that's something that we're going to continue to do. I'm going to continue to do that with my Canadian counterpart, Minister Goodale. And it's a focus of ours, very definitely.
Okay. Well, speaking of that good relationship between Canada and the U.S., the Prime Minister was here earlier this year in Washington. Yes. He got an enthusiastic reception from the White House.
Yes, he did.
Well, for those of us on the outside watching...
And I had an opportunity to meet him, too.
Did you? How was that?
I was very pleased to meet the new Prime Minister.
And what were your impressions?
He is a dynamic, effective leader for Canada. And I think that Canadians everywhere should have good reason to be proud.
So does that make a difference behind the scenes when you're working on these bilateral issues, when you have a president and a prime minister who seem to get along so well? People call it a bromance. The photo ops are wonderful. What does that really add up to, if anything? Is there anything that moves along more quickly or happens behind the scenes as a result?
I would say that in diplomacy, personal relationships do matter. I know that from situations where my boss, the president, has a good working relationship on a personal level with the head of state, head of government of another country. And it's also the case at my level, at the secretarial, ministerial level. If we have a good personal connection, I just today spoke to one of my European counterparts to call him to give him some good news about something. If we have a personal connection, rather than work through our staffs to cable some piece of good news, which the minister may hear about 2 or 3 weeks from now, my style is to just pick up the phone and simply call that person. And I've done that both with respect to my Canadian counterparts and counterparts elsewhere. So the personal connections do matter, and I think do stimulate and drive a lot of the diplomacy, a lot of the agreements that we're able to reach. And I think it's an important component of any bilateral and multilateral relationship.
And do you feel that this new government has anything changed in your world, in your experience since they?
Well, I have had the vantage point of working with both the current Canadian government and the previous one. I had a very good working relationship with Minister Blaney, and I think I have a good working relationship with Minister Goodale and his counterparts. The two governments are very different, but I also think that both governments understand fully the security needs of their citizens, their country, and the desire for us to work together in our shared interest.
What do you find the biggest difference in your experience?
Well, obviously the personalities are different, but in the end, we find ways to effectively communicate. And when Minister Goodale was here, for example, we signed a pre-clearance agreement at specific locations. I had signed a broader pre-clearance agreement with Minister Blaney last year, which was really unprecedented: land, sea, air, rail. And when Minister Goodale and the Prime Minister were here earlier this year, we were able to move that forward in the right direction. And so anytime there's a new government, there's a time that it takes to get to know people. I know from being in the Obama administration from the beginning, there's a time for those of us who are new in government to learn where the desk drawers are and learn how everything works. But we've had a terrific startup time with the new government, and I think that there will be a productive relationship going forward.
And speaking of the pre-clearance agreement, you'll need legislation, right, to make that a reality. Is there a plan to get that through this Congress, which is having so much trouble passing anything in recent years?
I think that certainly our Congress, on a bipartisan basis, understands the importance of security beyond our borders. I like to tell audiences, anytime I have the opportunity, to use a football metaphor, anytime I have the opportunity to defend our Homeland Security, not on the 1 yard line, but say on the 40 or the 50-yard line, and move our security out, I want to take that. So pre-clearance is a way to do that. I think the Canadian government understands and appreciates that well and has that shared desire and that shared goal. So pre-clearance is something that is the wave of the future. We have pre-clearance arrangements right now at 15 airports worldwide, a number in Canada, and we're continuing to build on that in other parts of the world.
So another shared priority is dealing with refugees from war zones, and specifically from Syria. So Canada, under the Trudeau government, took in 25,000 refugees very quickly. Meanwhile, the U.S., with a target of 10,000, has, I think, accepted fewer than 3,000 so far. Do you think Canada, which has a population that's just a fraction of the U.S., is moving too quickly, or do you think the U.S. is moving too slowly?
Well, actually, at this point, this fiscal year, the President has made a commitment to accept at least 10,000. At this point, we're well past 3,000 who have been physically resettled in the United States, but we have approved thousands more who just haven't been physically resettled yet, and we have pre-approved, subject to certain additional security checks, another 7,000 or 8,000. So we're well on track, I believe, to meet and exceed our goal of 10,000 Syrian refugees for the year. Our refugee screening process in the United States is very thorough. It's multi-layered. On average, there is a period of something like 18 to 24 months before a refugee is gone through the process and is physically resettled here. We have put a lot of additional resources on refugee resettlement to meet our commitment for Syrians and to meet our worldwide commitment. Many more refugee screening officers. We've had people in our United States Citizenship and Immigration Service volunteer for refugee screening to meet our commitment. And I think we are on track to do that. The Trudeau government has been, frankly, a shining example of a country's humanitarian commitment to address the worldwide refugee crisis. And so a number of us really appreciate the Trudeau government for stepping up and taking in 25,000. Our commitment is 10, and I believe we will meet and exceed that commitment.
But you said 18 to 24 months to
Yes.
vet the refugees, and the Trudeau government met their goal, and I think it was 6 months. So are you confident that the vetting was adequate if there's such a disparity between how long it takes?
I believe that the Trudeau government went through a process very deliberately, consistent with their Prime Minister's goal, your Prime Minister's goal, and I'm quite sure consistent with their own security needs, security precautions to meet this commitment. And it's something that, again, I believe is a terrific worldwide example and an example for all countries.
And you were recently in refugee camps in
Yes.
Turkey yourself. What did you see there?
Mostly women and children. Most people, the overwhelming majority of refugees are families, men, women, children, fathers, mothers, kids, who are fleeing the very same violence that we're so concerned about, the very same acts of terrorism, fleeing warfare for a better life. I've been in a refugee camp in Turkey. I've been to our processing center in Turkey. And I was very, frankly, I was very moved by what I saw. A lot of families desperate for a new life. The refugee camp I visited in Turkey, there had been families who've been living there 2 and 3 years. And a lot of people who want to come to the United States, come to Canada for a better life. I've met a number of individuals who were quite impressive, including a little boy who spoke perfect King's English, who wanted to come to the United States. I asked him, "How did you learn your English?" And he said, "From watching TV, sir." And and he has since been resettled in the United States, he and his mom. I look forward to at some point actually meeting him.
Oh, interesting.
Here in the United States. But so many refugees are personal stories of people who want a better life. And so refugee resettlement always has to have and should have a security element to it. But it's meeting our humanitarian commitments globally to address a worldwide refugee crisis. It's part of my Homeland Security mission, in my view, to help resettle refugees, and certainly with respect to the United States, it's something that has been traditionally part of our heritage to accept refugees. It's something we've done for decades and decades.
Well,
Albert Einstein was a refugee, for example. One of Steve Jobs' parents was a refugee. Refugees, immigrants in general, add to the strength and the heritage of a country like ours. And so it's something we must continue to do, particularly in this environment of a worldwide refugee crisis.
But given all that, is 10,000 a reasonable number for a country of the size and wealth of the United States, given the global refugee crisis?
Well, we believe it is, and we believe that we'd like to do more. We haven't settled yet on a number for FY17, but it may exceed 10,000 now that we have all these additional resources that we have put in place to ramp up our refugee resettlement. I'd like to see us do more, very clearly. The process is very deliberate, very careful. We're always evaluating whether there are more security checks that are necessary. We have in place right now a process that I believe is thorough, multi-layered, robust, to address the world situation. And in future years, I would expect us and hope to see us do more. In addition, as you know, I'm sure the United States has provided billions in humanitarian assistance to that part of the world, to refugees in that part of the world.
On the flip side, there are now proposals that, in fact, the U.S. should ban Muslims from coming into this country as a security measure. Do you think that would help Homeland Security?
I believe that in this environment of terrorist-directed attacks and terrorist-inspired attacks, and the prospect of homegrown violent extremism, terrorist organizations' use of the internet. It is critical as part of our Homeland Security mission, and I believe that the Canadian government shares this view as well, that we build bridges to American Muslim communities, Muslim communities in our country, and not vilify Muslims, build bridges to American Muslim communities. And so I have personally spent a lot of time in communities around the United States, meeting with American Muslims in places like Boston, Dearborn, Michigan, Minneapolis, Chicago, California, Houston, Virginia, Maryland, building bridges to American Muslim communities to say, help us help you prevent somebody from heading in the wrong direction toward a violent extremist direction. So we're building these bridges. It's something that we must do. It's something that we will continue to do. And frankly, rhetoric that vilifies, isolates Muslims is not helpful and is contrary to our Homeland Security interest. I've said that before, and I will say it again. We need to build bridges to American Muslim communities. The overwhelming majority of Muslims living in this country are peaceful, patriotic people. The Muslim religion is 1.6 billion worldwide. I think it's the second largest religion worldwide, is as diverse as Christianity. And so when we build bridges to Muslim communities, plural, it means, Pakistani Americans in Boston, Somali Americans in Minneapolis. So there are many different communities. So it's a large, complex mission. But I think it's critical that we do this. And I'm pleased that in Congress there seems to be bipartisan support for we refer to this inside the Beltway here in Washington as CVE, Countering Violent Extremism.
Well, we saw the attacks in Ottawa. Is there something that Canada and the U.S. are doing or should be doing together on countering the homegrown threat?
Yes, we have already talked about sharing best practices. You mentioned Ottawa, what happened in October 2014. I think maybe a week or two before, I was in Ottawa to visit Minister Blaney, to visit Prime Minister Harper, and I walked right past the site that was the site of the first attack that day, probably just 2 weeks before. So when it happened, it sort of struck me on a very personal level. And I thought of my friends and colleagues who I'd just been with that day.
Can you take me to that day? I mean, are you on the phone to Ottawa? What's happening when there's an attack in Ottawa?
My recollection is that I called Stephen Blaney probably that day or within a day after it happened, because I'd just been there maybe 2 weeks before. And both this government and the prior one have, I think, done a good job at working together on our shared national security interest, information sharing consistent with our laws, further border security consistent with our laws, pre-clearance initiatives. And it's something that I think should continue. When the attack in Ottawa occurred, a lot of us here in the United States felt that on a very personal level, just like we did with attacks in other places in the world. But because Canada is so close, because Ottawa is so close, a lot of us felt it on a very personal level and felt the pain of a lot of people in Ottawa, in Canada. And so an attack like that, in many respects, feels like an attack on us as a people, collectively. And it's the very type of attack that I think both countries need to continue to guard against and be concerned about in this age of terrorist-inspired, terrorist-enabled, and terrorist-directed attacks.
So you're trying to do that, and on the other hand, you're trying to keep this big trade relationship going, right?
Yes.
Balancing these two interests. Where is the border going? What is your vision for the future of the border? What are you striving towards?
We have, both governments, a Beyond the Border initiative, doing things collectively like trusted traveler programs, Nexus, where if you're a member of one, you're a member of another, where if you've been screened for one, you get the benefit of the other. I want to see us do more of that type of thing because we have this shared border, because we do so much lawful trade and travel together that benefits both of our economies. And so President Obama, along with the prime ministers of Canada, have shared in this interest of promoting lawful trade and travel through expediting exports, expediting imports. President Obama signed an executive order for what we refer to as a single window, so that it's sort of one-stop shopping. You go to one government agency when you're exporting or importing goods. And I know that the Canadian government's working in the same direction. And I've been impressed in the 30 months I've been Secretary of Homeland Security, how much time and attention we have devoted toward this Beyond the Border initiative.
Well, it's interesting. You talk about the Nexus cards, which give you expedited access, but those things work when there's the infrastructure on the ground to support them, right? When there's enough people and when there's enough physical dedicated lanes that truckers can use or cars can use. But building that border infrastructure has been a real challenge, and finding the money for it, right?
Well, part of something like Nexus or Global Entry is to expedite travel so that you don't have to spend the time in a line to meet a human being and to be screened by a human being. So Global Entry, for example, is almost all of it is automated now. But anyway, I interrupted you, sorry.
I was going to say that in Windsor and Detroit, there's this effort to build a new trade crossing there, and Canada's had to find a way to raise and finance $4 billion to do it. So looking at the future, where will money come from? Is it going to be private-public partnerships? Will there be a dedicated bank? It doesn't look as though the U.S. government is going to be allotting money for cross-border.
Well, with regard to Detroit-Windsor, I'm pleased that just recently we have found a way to A, build a bridge, B, build the customs plaza, and C, fund the customs plaza going forward. It took a lot of time. It was critically important that we build this second bridge, this new customs plaza, because that bridge that we have now is one of the busiest, if not the busiest, port and crossing on the northern border. So yes, we did have to rely upon some fairly creative mechanisms to get it funded, but I'm pleased that we were able to do that.
Looking back at your tenure as secretary, you've talked in a recent speech you gave to graduates, you talked about some of the difficulty and the personal struggle with having to make difficult decisions, uphold the law, versus some of the ideals you have. And you talked about being a father and seeing these refugee children from Central America. What are your thoughts about the legacy that you want to leave when you leave office?
Good question. I have, in this administration, been a Defense Department official and now a Homeland Security official. As the lawyer for the Department of Defense, which is what I did before I was in this job, I had to sign off on a lot of military operations, a lot of lethal force operations. And in this job, which includes border security, refugee resettlement, those missions involve people. And in whatever we do, in policy making, in government decision making, we have to always be mindful of the human aspect of our work. And so on our southern border with Mexico, I have spent hours and hours with hundreds of kids and families on the border who've been apprehended crossing our border illegally. The 7-year-old who came here all by herself from Central America looking for her mom or looking for her dad, to appreciate why people are motivated to take the journey, or why people are motivated to leave Syria and look for a better life, for a better understanding there. And as I said in that speech you referred to, on a personal level, I'd love to just scoop up all these kids and take them home with me, but I know I can't. And we have obligations to enforce the law. We have obligations to screen and resettle refugees properly. But we always have to be mindful of the human element here. And so I have endeavored to always keep the human element in mind. And you talk about my leaving public service. We're looking at 6 or 7 months from now, and it really will be time for me to leave public service and go back into private life. One of the things that I think makes our country great are citizen public servants, people who have been in private life. And for most of my adult life, I've been a private lawyer, a private citizen, and I will look forward to returning to that. In the time I've spent in this administration, we've done and accomplished a lot of things. The things that I am most proud of are the things that make someone's life better, whether that's collectively, whether that's thousands of people, or whether that's even 1 or 2 people. I've had the opportunity to be involved in helping individuals, individual situations, individual cases, improve somebody's life. And that means a lot to me. And that's the kind of thing that I'm most proud of.
And meanwhile, on the flip side, there's an argument that the U.S. should be building walls on its border. Why isn't there a wall? Why aren't you building one on the border?
Well, in fact, there is a wall on our southern border, pursuant to something called the Secure Fence Act, which was enacted by Congress about 10 years ago. We have built 700 miles of fence across our southern border in the places where it makes sense to build a wall. Our southern border consists of desert, it consists of the Rio Grande, which is this windy river, it consists of mountains. And so we have built a wall in places where it makes sense to build a wall. We believe, and on a bipartisan basis, a lot of people believe that the best way to go about border security is walls where it makes sense to have walls, surveillance, technology, Border Patrol agents, people, aerial vehicles, trucks, depending upon the terrain, depending upon the situation, a risk-based approach to border security that is agile, that is smart, that is efficient. And so that's what we have. And we've invested in that over the last 15 years, and we've seen a pretty marked decline in the number of attempts to cross our border illegally since 15 years ago. The high was the year 2000. There were 1.6 million people apprehended on our southern border. Today, in recent years, that number is somewhere between 300,000–400,000 a year. So it's a fraction of what it used to be. Is there more to do? Definitely yes. Is there more border security that we can invest in? Definitely yes. But building a wall over the entire 2,000-mile southwest border is not a wise, smart investment of taxpayer money. I like to tell people that if a migrant is motivated enough to leave Central America, travel south to north across the entire country of Mexico and climb a 10,000-foot mountain, that person's not going to be deterred by a 10-foot fence. And my predecessor used to say, build a 10-foot fence, I'll show you an 11-foot ladder. So building a wall across all that different type of terrain is not a smart investment of taxpayer money. And so more technology, more surveillance is the answer. And we've invested a lot. We can always do more.
Mr. Secretary, thank you so much.
Thank you.